Hi everyone! Today on Pack to Hack, we're at the 6-day countdown to getting on the startup bus, riding from New York City to New Orleans. And we're going to talk about what type of software might you consider bringing on the startup bus, or really for any hackathon you might go to throughout the country. And the software we can talk about in a few different categories. And one really important thing to note is if you're working on a very specialty project, for instance, if you're working on wearables hardware, you might need additional software than what we're going to talk about today. But we can talk about a little bit later how you might find that kind of software as well. Most of this software is available solely online. You don't actually need to download anything, with a few exceptions. And it's really ideal to, if you have to download something, download it before you get on the bus or before you get to the hackathon. The reason why is there might not be very good Wi-Fi wherever you're going, or if everyone's trying to download very large files on the Wi-Fi at the same time, it's going to be insanely slow unless the venue has gotten really high bandwidth for the event. So try to save yourself the effort and focus on things that are predominantly online or that you can install on your machine ahead of time. So the different categories of software you might bring to a hackathon are creative software. This is anything you can use to create videos, images, any graphic design you'll need for a website, marketing materials, or sharing your ideas with other people. Then there's prototyping and development software. I put these together because you're going to want to start with the fastest prototype possible, which often isn't developing something. It might be drawing something in an app or on a napkin, or using a click-through prototype. So we'll start on that end of the spectrum, and then we'll go through to what type of development software might you consider from a development environment on your machine. We'll also talk about collaboration software. So you're going to have a team of folks working at your hackathon. You need a way to talk with each other, share files, and share ideas. We'll talk about ways to get customer feedback and different tools you can use to facilitate that. And lastly, some tools that can help you pitch effectively at the end of the hackathon, because at the end of the day, you're being judged and you want a way to show off what you've created. So we'll start with the creative software. And the first tool to talk about is anything that can be used for graphic design. And I frequently use Sketch, so I'll start with talking about that. It's a vector tool that you can use to create all different kinds of illustrations. But similar tools that can do the same thing are GIMP, Photoshop, and Illustrator, and there's also many other tools out there. Really use whatever's of preference to you. And Sketch, the way I use it, I'll often make my graphics and any of the design layouts that I'll be working with here, because it's very quick to actually prototype and create them. So here's an example of a logo that I had created, and all the different pieces are in different layers that I added. You can group them, and to show you from a shape perspective what you can create, you can really do any shapes, free-form drawing if you needed to, and there's also pre-built templates here so that if you wanted to create mock-ups of how a product would behave either on a mobile phone or a desktop, you can do that very easily with tools through here. Next, as I mentioned yesterday, I'm Mac-based, so a lot of the tools I'll describe are things that were free available on my Mac, but there's alternatives that you could use on a PC, or even alternative tools you could use on a Mac. So the next tool I'll talk about is iMovie, and this is what I use stock for any editing of video that I'll use in a pitch or use in marketing material. And this is great because it's both available on my iPhone as well as tablet, and it can also be used on my Mac. If you're not if you don't have iMovie available, an equivalent alternative would be Premiere. And to show you a little bit of what I mean by editing, I can layer in multiple different pieces of a video. So for instance, the background here are different things that I recorded in Google Slides, as well as live video of our product working. And I layered that in with some audio that I could create a pitch video that we launched before our team did our pitch. Next is, along with your video materials, you're also likely going to need some great high quality audio. And I like to create my own. So I'll frequently write a jingle or meld some jingle that a team had worked on with some instrumental and make a fun marketing video. And to get that audio, I use GarageBand. Again, that's stock on my Mac. If you are not Mac-based, you can use Audition as an alternative. It's very similar in functionality. And to open that, I can layer in my track from a vocal perspective, as well as any instrumental track. So that's what I've done here, and modified it and saved it. And often what I'll do from here is actually use the audio that I created in GarageBand and layer that into iMovie over top of a video that I had worked on. If you're working with any 3D graphics, let's say you're working with augmented reality or virtual reality, or even you're going to create some type of video game, Blender is a free tool that many people use to work on those graphics. So this is an example of a specialty tool. If you're working in any of those type of places, your 3D models can be created through Blender and used for many different applications. There's also example models that are already available, so that if you're not as well versed in creating a model, you can find them already. And one other type of usage of Blender is creating models for 3D printing. So if you have a crazy idea that you want to print vases, for instance, you could design your own and use the models to print them out. And it'd be really cool if we saw people 3D printing things on the glass. I've heard that in the past, a few folks have done that, and it would be fun to see something similar. Next, after you've created all of your materials, you're going to want a way to put them together. And a way that I use to take my videos, my product demos, and any mashups that I'm working on is using Snagit. So Snagit is screen capture software for both stills as well as video. And I find this tool super easy to create the live demo experience. And as we talked about yesterday, it's so important to get a great video of your product working in action before you go to pitch. This is what I use to live manipulate the product and take the video. Next is a suite of tools called Spark, and it's actually available on the iPad. And I use this tool to create quick graphics and videos for many different formats. So Spark has all of the video and formats for all different kinds of graphics for social media or your favorite streaming site, all pre-programmed. And so you don't need to do any extra modification like you may need to do in some of the other image software. And so if I flip over to show you that, let's see here. On the iPad, you'll see I have both Spark Video and Spark Post. So Spark Video will let you create really quick free-form videos, and Spark Post will do the same thing for a post. So actually all of the graphics you're seeing in the stream today came from my creations in Spark Post. So you can say, okay, I want to start out with a template for something. So you can see if you wanted to use the stock template and just add your own text, you could do that very easily here. If you wanted to start from scratch, so let's say I want to start with a solid color, and this is how I started with creating the graphics for the stream. If we say, okay, we like green, you can see here at the bottom all of the different sizes that are stock ready to go. So let's pretend that we're creating a Twitter header. The size is all set on this. We'll reconnect here quickly. So the size is all preset, and you can actually change it from Twitter to LinkedIn to Twitch banners to any print material and any type of social post. So it's a really simple, easy way to create graphics. And if you remember in the startup environment, something that's super important is being able to create these things quickly. So though you could go to Sketch and spend a lot of time creating these banners fully custom from scratch, if it's your very first prototype, it's often not a good use of time. So I will start out with using any of these Spark tools to make things go faster. And then if we do an iteration 2 or a version 2 of the prototype, we'll then fully custom make them from scratch. Next is you might want to live stream your experience. So just like I'm streaming right now, I plan to, throughout the Startup Bus experience, stream. And if I'm streaming at home, I'll use a PC and I'll use something called Streamlabs OBS or Slobs. That's not yet available on Mac. You can find basic OBS available on Mac, but Slobs is not yet available. So when I was researching how I could stream on the road, I looked at Mac alternatives, which if you do much streaming, you know there's not a lot of streaming tools available for Mac because most folks who are playing games and streaming are streaming from PCs. What I did find for Mac is Lightstream, and that's a fully browser-based streaming tool. The functionality is not vast, so you won't find all of the tools that you will find in OBS or Slobs on your desktop. However, it does have all of the basic tools you would need to get a stream launched. So throughout the Startup Bus, I will be using Lightstream on my Mac. And I found it really, really simple to get things started and running on the stream. It's pretty WYSIWYG in terms of clicking, adding the videos, adding the cameras that you wish, and adding in all of the different scene elements. And the other really cool thing about Lightstream is you can use your mobile phone to actually click through the different scenes and control your scene control your stream while you're streaming. So that's all of the creative tools. We're going to flip over to prototyping and development tools. And when we talked about prototyping, we said that you might not want to develop something right away. So for instance, if we talk about our product that we want to help everyone smile, we might want to create a very simple click-through prototype that we can show and talk with folks in a town while we're driving through, that we didn't spend much time on. And if folks say, no, I don't like this, it's not really gonna fit or work out for what I'm trying to do, we haven't wasted much time trying to figure that out. The common click-through prototype tool that I will use is proto.io. It's really, really simple to get up and running. It feels very much like any of your like slides tools, and you can really do a really fast prototype here. Next is, as we talked about before, I use my iPad a lot and I like drawing on it with the Apple Pencil. If you don't even want to spend as much time as doing a click-through prototype, you can draw your first prototypes using any tablet of your choice. And this, again, you're trying to create that prototype as fast as possible and get feedback as fast as possible. And this is a really, really fast way to do that. And if you don't want to go as high def as this, take a napkin, take a piece of paper, take whatever trash you might have and draw your prototype on that. It doesn't need to be fancy. You're just trying to get the concept across of this is what I'm trying to do. Could I get your feedback on what I'm working on? Once we've transitioned from getting a basic idea of what we like our product to be and getting some customer feedback, we'll often transition to developing the different pieces. And the first tool I use to collaborate with a team is Cloudcraft. It lets you create an architecture drawing. So an architecture drawing will give you a high-level view of what all of the different pieces are that you're going to need for your product. And this lets you split up who's working on what across your whole team. So if your hack team is 4 people, you can say, okay, I'm going to split all the pieces here amongst 4. Or if you have a very large team of 10, you can split it across the 10 people. But you have the picture to easily go back to, okay, this is everything we need. Here's who's working on what. And here's the check mark when things get finished in the picture. There are many other tools that are equivalent to this. The reason why I use Cloudcraft is because most of my builds are Amazon Web Services based, and Cloudcraft has all of the icons for all of the AWS stock in its stencils. In addition, I really like the view of this, the kind of 3D flow, so that's why I've gravitated to this over time. The next tool, as I mentioned, I frequently build in an AWS stack. And the reason why is my teammates and I in the past have learned that we can build insanely quickly in that stack. We've actually stood up full products in under an hour for a basic web stack, and then we're able to create a fully working product in 2 hours, to give you a for instance. So again, when you're thinking about a hackathon, you're trying to create things as quickly as possible. So this is where I've found that I can create things as quickly as possible. But there are other equivalents such as Google Cloud and other cloud services that you can do something similar. So I'll talk through the stack that I typically use, and you would hear this referred to as a function as a service stack, or FaaS. That's a fancy name for using Lambdas in Amazon. You'll also hear this referred to as a quick web stack in Amazon. And the tools I use there first are Route 53. So Route 53 gives you a domain name. So you've just created a new company. You're coming up with some fancy name for that company. The very first thing you want to do is go find a domain name for it. And you can quickly register it with Route 53. Next is CloudFront. CloudFront allows content delivery network for your site. So if you start hammering it with a lot of traffic, you want to make sure it's highly available and fast for all of the different people that are going to be using it throughout the country or even throughout the world. CloudFront lets you do that and lets you scale whether you have 10 people or 10 million people trying to hit your site. Next, for static assets, they live on an S3 bucket. So this is things like your HTML, JavaScript, your image files. They all sit in S3 and are served up via the flow. And if you have dynamic functionality, the API gateway can serve to front any of your Lambdas or even third-party services you might be using and create a really clean API. So what we'll often do is fully create the API and API gateway before we actually write any code. You can even mock all of your services there very, very fast. And then we'll plug them into Lambdas to actually serve any dynamic functionality. And Lambdas, I frequently write them in Node. They can also be written in Python. Either one is pretty handy. It lets you have multiple different languages used across your team. So if we have a team of 4 people and I have Node and Python experience, but someone else has experience in a different language, we can use all of those different languages at the same time to write different functions in parallel. And this lets us go faster again. So it doesn't make me need to learn a language on the fly at the hackathon. It doesn't make the other person need to learn a language on the fly at the hackathon. For smaller functionality, I might say, hey, I want to try that new language, or they might say the same thing. But it would take us too much time to try to say, let's all learn brand new language during the hackathon. Lastly, the DynamoDB provides any database functionality that you might need on your product, and it's served up through any Lambda services you might be accessing. You can also connect straight from the API gateway to the Dynamo database for any basic read-write type functionality. So this is the way we do anything really super fast on Amazon Web Services to create a product at a hackathon. Next, you might want to use an integrated development environment on your machine. And these are going to be specific to whatever languages you might be working with. So if you're working with a JavaScript stack, common tools used there include VS Code, which is totally free, and WebStorm. So here I'm using WebStorm on my machine. I've used it for a long time. VS Code provides very similar functionality. If you were working with a lot of Python, you might want to work with a Jupyter Notebook or any other Python IDE. And if you're creating iPhone apps or tablet apps or Apple Watch apps, you're going to be working with Xcode. And there are many, many, many other languages you could possibly choose, and they will come with their own IDEs. And so you're just going to want to make sure whatever one you plan on using is pre-installed. So plan on using. You don't actually know what you're going to be building before you get to the hackathon. So it can be difficult to know what you need to have on your machine from an IDE perspective. So having a VS Code or a WebStorm there can get you ready for many, many, many different technologies you might use, but you're not going to hit every scenario that is possible. So this is the one space where have the IDEs available on your machine that you're very comfortable with and you might commonly use. And if there's an edge case scenario that you decide to work with a team on a product with technology that you haven't used before, that's when you're going to need to download something. So instead of, if you have a team of 4 and you decide, for instance, you all need the Arduino IDE, instead of all 4 of you trying to download that IDE at the same time, have one person download the IDE onto a flash drive and then share it across all 4 machines. From a hit to the overall bus or travel bandwidth or any hackathon bandwidth you might be hitting, it makes things much faster. That IDE is not very large. Some of them are. If you start ending up with gigs of content and have 4 people doing it at the same time, you really are significantly negatively impacting the network compared with if you had one person do it. And this is also a good example of if the bus stops to have a break somewhere and there's better public Wi-Fi and we're not all trying to hit it on the bus at the same time, that's a great way to get the content you might need for your hack. Next, you're going to want to have developer tools available on your machine and some familiarity with using them. So if you've never used DevTools before, go poke around it in Google Chrome before you hop on the bus or go to your hackathon. Inevitably, you're going to break your build, or you're going to have an issue with things not appearing right, or when you change res on your screen, it's not going to float correctly, and any number of issues you might run into. You can debug them more easily with Chrome developer tools. And DevTools are also available across other browsers, such as Safari and IE. Whatever you plan to be developing and rapidly prototyping with, just get yourself familiar with the dev tools in that space. Next, again, we were talking about speed. So if it's functionality that's very core to the product you're building and important, you might want to hand code that. If it's functionality that's commonly available in the marketplace and everyone uses it, you're going to want to try to avoid needing to build it over again. So one tool you can use to do that with no code at all is Zapier. So Zapier does integrations between two different tools across many different tools across the marketplace, such as any of your social tools, any of your email type tools, any document tools. It can let you connect things quickly with no code at all. So if you're doing a common integration, you might consider using something like this, or even getting an NPM package if you wanted to pull it into your Node project, or any other package for the language you're working with, instead of trying to rewrite it again. And as like we talked about before, you don't want to have to wait to download these packages until you get there. So common things you have to do with products are working with social media, working with different types of communication, working with different types of documents and file uploads. If you know these things are commonly going to need to be used in products, you might want to have them pre-downloaded and ready to go for the hackathon. One specialty development tool in working with many types of hardware is the Arduino Development Studio. When I work on hacks that involve wearables or Internet of Things, this is the tool of choice in developing there. And so I have this pre-installed and ready to go if a team ends up wanting to work on hardware. Again, if you don't work in that space, you're not going to need the tool. So this is an example of there are many types of specialty dev. If your team ends up needing to do specialty dev, you'll have another IDE that you might not have considered having on your machine ahead of time. The next set of tools all have to do with collaboration. So you have a team of maybe 4 people, and you need to be able to effectively talk with them. So the first tool I love to use in this space is called Mural. And Mural lets you do whiteboarding virtually with anyone, anywhere in the world. And the sticky notes that you drag around or the drawings you put on here, everyone can live interact with. I love using this tool because it gives everyone equal voice and equal weight in a conversation. It's also really easy to use and lets you do drag and drop collaboratively across a whiteboard space. So I'll often use this to show here are all the pieces we're working on, or here's the backlog of things we're working on, or here are some ideas that we have. Again, we talked about yesterday that because it's a web tool, if you lose your internet briefly, you lose your whiteboard space. So that is the one drawback here of if you're relying on this to be your backlog for your whole project and you end up losing the internet, that can really get you in a tough spot. So that's one thing to keep in mind. If you're at a hackathon with super reliable internet, I wouldn't worry about it. Next, you're going to want a way to talk with your team. So what often ends up happening at a hackathon is one person may need to go out and talk with a group of customers to get customer feedback. Another person may need to go out and get extra supplies to work on building something, and other folks may need to keep developing on the product. And if you're not all co-located, Slack is a really fast way to get in touch with everybody. A common mistake is not trading contact information, because if you remember, these folks are people you're just meeting at a hackathon very often. And if you don't trade that contact info and your team splits, now you're in that space of, uh-oh, like how are we going to get everybody back together, which can be challenging in a time-boxed environment like the hackathon. So common tool Slack is a first choice. Another first choice would be Discord. It's a very similar tool, and a lot of gamers will use that tool. Or if you want to do this more low key, I'll trade phone numbers and just do a group chat with everyone so that you have an instant we can talk to each other. Slack also becomes a really easy way to share small documents back and forth. So if I want to keep sharing iterations over logos or any Viz content that I'll be working on, I'll drop it in Slack and can let everyone say, hey, I like it, or no, it's eh. Slack is also home of the Party Parrot. So the emojis of the Party Parrot, which can add like a little extra fun to your hackathon. So it's something to consider using for your communication. Next, we have GitHub. So we need to share our code. There needs to be one code base, not four, across your whole team. Folks who are working in development have all used this already. And it's just really the go-to to store all your assets. It also makes a really good way to be able to go back and look at your product after the hackathon and point to people you might interview with in the future, or if you start to do workshops in the community or at your school, you have all the materials ready to go to show, here's what we worked on throughout the hackathon, but now here's how you can apply that to other types of projects. So I've definitely reused my past hackathon materials for a lot of different teaching type applications, and having them available in GitHub after the hackathon is really a great plus. During the hackathon, GitHub is a lifesaver in terms of like, don't have 4 versions of your code. If you're trying to merge things like that, on no sleep, like it makes everybody miserable. So try to get your GitHub repo as one of the first things that you set up when you get your team together. Next, Slack and GitHub all hit ceiling limitations of size of file that you can transfer. If you're working on creative that includes a lot of video files, you're going to hit the wall in terms of sharing them back and forth with your team. So you might need another way for file collaboration. So any file sharing tool like OneDrive or Dropbox, any equivalent of those that you can share files of over a gig will have you in a good position to be able to still communicate with your team. If you're all Mac-based, using AirDrop is a quick way to do this as well of, hey, can you share that over with me? I'll AirDrop it if everybody's Mac-based. The next type of tools that we'll cover are feedback. So you need to get customer feedback of what your product is and what they would actually like it to be. So the first way to do that is on social media. So you're going to be launching many, many different types of social media accounts throughout your time, and you'll often brand them to the actual product you're creating. And using social media can let you get quick feedback of, yes, folks are actually interested in the product that we're creating. Next, we have different survey tools, such as SurveyMonkey. And there's many different alternatives to this. The thing to watch out for when using SurveyMonkey is the time frames in which the results will return. You don't want your results after the hackathon's over. Second, you need to use a targeted audience to make sure that the folks you're surveying would actually be your target customers. So when you start to get into a targeted audience, there is cost involved with that. So keep in mind that the more targeted the audience gets, the more expensive it gets from a survey perspective. So it could actually be prohibitively expensive to get feedback, in which case you might be better off hitting the streets and finding your target audience on the street if you have the ability to do that. Next, you can use Typeform to create surveys. And Typeform doesn't have audiences built in. So with Typeform, you need to then get it to your audience. So you could get it to your audience on social media. You could get it to your audience in person and walking around with your product on devices and asking them to fill out a survey while they're walking through the product. But Typeform makes really beautiful forms. They present well and are very quick to get stood up, which is why this is another great way to get feedback. The last category of software that you'll consider is pitch tools. So there are many different ways to give final pitches, and some hackathons require that you submit a deck of materials in order to be able to pitch with all of your demos included in the deck. When that's required, I'll use Google Slides to put those materials together. The great thing, because it's cloud-based, it'll look the same regardless of where it ends up getting launched from. And I can embed all the videos of my demos inside the slide deck. If I can have the flexibility to use my own laptop in giving a final pitch, I'll use a tool called Reflector and use a combination of Reflector and Google Slides. So Google Slides, or having any videos like kind of put together in a wall on my machine, will let me show content and keep me guided on what the pitch is about, while Reflector will let me give a live demo. So when I was showing the iPad earlier, I was using AirPlay to go from my iPad to the Mac. And I can use that on my iPhone or iPad and show live what is going on throughout the demo. So it's better than needing to separately plug in the iPhone and your MacBook. And the reason why is if you're first projecting your Mac and then you need to flip the physical inputs to project your phone, you're going to lose time. And in your pitch, it's very short amount of time, and you don't want to waste that time on transitioning from one device to another. So using Reflector, I'll have everything up here and ready to go all at the same time. The one drawback of Reflector is it all works based off of the wireless network. So just like you saw earlier in the stream, when the visual cut out of the iPad, if you're at a hackathon and the Wi-Fi is not so great, you can run into the same situation where you're giving a demo and all of a sudden AirPlay cuts out and you can no longer see your tablet screen, which can then make you lose time in showing what's going on. And so it's a trade-off of deciding whether you want to risk working off the Wi-Fi or whether you want to risk wasting the time on swapping physical inputs. those are all of the different software that I can recommend to Pack to Hack. I'm sure there are many other, many other different pieces of software that you might consider bringing on the startup bus or to any hackathon. I'd love to talk about that with you in chat or in comments, and we can come up with a comprehensive list of what you might bring from a software perspective to the hackathon. For tomorrow's Pack to Hack, we're going to focus on food. So what yummies might you want to bring on the startup bus or to a hackathon to make sure that you're well fed and your energy is kept high throughout the event? So that'll be tomorrow. Thanks for watching, everybody. Bye.